This video is made possible by Brilliant. You're going to learn more about Brilliant later in today's video, but if you'd like to learn more about them right now, go to brilliant.org/biographics. You'll also find a link in the description below. If you were alive during the 80s and 90s, there's likely a single name you associate with the word science. Carl Sagan was the most popular scientist of his era, a guy who could take complex, abstract concepts and make them understandable for millions. A trained astrophysicist who worked on some of NASA's most famous missions, Sagan was also the man who turned a generation onto the wonders of our own solar system. But while most of us probably only know Sagan's public persona, the one he assumed to present PBS's classic 1980 series Cosmos, how many of us know the man himself? Born into a working-class Brooklyn neighborhood, Sagan worked hard to become the most eminent scientist in America. But he also courted controversy, pioneering ideas that made him as many enemies as he had adoring fans. Inspiring, insightful, egotistic, seductive, this is the life of Carl Sagan, the man who brought astronomy to the people. On clear nights in Brooklyn, it's still possible to just make out the stars despite the light pollution. Tiny pinpricks of light faintly visible through New York City's eternal orange glow, they act as a comfort to some and a romantic backdrop for others. For young Carl Sagan, gazing up at those same stars 80 years ago, they acted as something else entirely, a mystery. Born Carl Edward Sagan on November 9, 1931 in Brooklyn, Carl was a boy with plenty of time on his hands for thinking. His father Samuel worked backbreaking hours in the garment industry, while his mother Rachel was strongly religious and very active in the local Reform Jewish community. As a result, young Carl spent many hours left to his own devices, hours that he spent trying to get answers to a seemingly simple question: what were these stars that he could see? Finding out the truth was harder than it sounded. According to Sagan, most of the adults he asked would reply with things like, "Oh, they're just lights in the sky." But the boy, he knew that they had to be something more than that. They were lights, sure, but what were these lights? What were they made of? How did they get there? Well, the answer to that question is gonna change young Carl's life. Sent by his mother to New York Public Library, aged either 5 or 7, the number changes depending on who is telling the story, the boy asked for a book on the stars. In an oft-told tale in later life, Sagan would recount how the librarian initially gave him a book on Clark Gable and Greta Garbo. Eventually, though, the boy got his book on astronomy. Back in Brooklyn, he sat down to find the answer to his question. The sun, the book said, is a star, but close up, the stars are suns, but far away. For you or I, raised on generations of science programs, that might sound kind of like a bit of a, well, yeah, duh moment. But for the young boy from Brooklyn, it was a revelation. Those lights in the sky, they were other suns, each maybe circled by their own worlds, each maybe shining down on some alien city where another boy looked at the heavens and wondered what those lights were. In that moment, Carl's conception of the universe had expanded as suddenly as the universe itself did after the Big Bang. As Sagan would later remark, the universe now seemed a whole lot bigger than Brooklyn. The discovery turned the boy into a veritable science fiction nut. He devoured the Martian novels of Edgar Rice Burroughs and began plotting to get himself abducted by aliens. In 1945, when he heard of Hitler's V-2 rockets falling on England, the boy thought only of how he could take one of those rockets and ride it to another world. Instead, his father, he took him to New Jersey. In 1947, Samuel Sagan was making enough money to move his family out of New York and into a middle-class neighborhood. By now, young Carl was 13, and he was obsessed with UFOs. In fact, it's easy to imagine at this point that this biography could turn into that of a great science fiction writer. Carl made his first ever radio broadcast around this time, telling audiences of a local college station that aliens were visiting Earth. Yet, it wouldn't be fiction that supplied Carl an outlet for his feelings of awe about space. In 1951, after graduating high school, Carl enrolled at the University of Chicago to study physics. It was while there that Sagan came to the attention of Gerard Kuiper. The man for whom the Kuiper belt on the fringes of our solar system is named, Kuiper is known today as the father of planetary science. And Kuiper, well, he was about to transform young Carl Sagan into his protege. On October 5, 1957, a strange speck of light streaked through the skies above Earth. If any children out there looked up and asked their parents what that light was, they wouldn't have gotten the answer that Carl Sagan once had. This wasn't a star, it was Sputnik 1, the first man-made satellite ever put into space, and it was about to kick off the space race. For Sagan, the flight of Sputnik 1 was the capstone to an eventful year. That June, he'd married Lynn Alexander, and the two were already planning to start a family. At the same time, his PhD advisor, Gerard Kuiper, was getting Sagan extra credit work on a top-secret US government project to detonate a nuclear bomb on the moon. You'd probably be glad to hear that that project never went anywhere. But Kuiper's influence, it was still exerting a pull on the younger man. Like an object in the Kuiper belt drawn inexorably towards the sun, Sagan was being pulled toward planetary science. The planet that eventually captured him, well, that would be Venus. That's not a clever metaphor for love here. The actual planet Venus was the focus of Sagan's thesis, in part because it was still such a mystery. At the end of the 1950s, all scientists knew about Venus was that it was covered in clouds. Many still assumed rolling oceans or maybe even humid jungles lay below the atmosphere. Sagan blew these beliefs out of the extraterrestrial water. Under the supervision of Kuiper, he theorized that Venus was a hellish planet with an atmosphere hot enough to melt lead. Not long after, he was proven right. The thesis threw a spotlight on Sagan. Barely had he graduated in 1960 than he was snapped up by the University of California, Berkeley to help build instruments for NASA's Mariner 2 mission. 2 years later, he was poached to work at Harvard University and the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory. It was while at Harvard that Sagan identified Mars's epic swirling dust storms. It was also while at Harvard that Sagan got seriously into aliens. For all his reputation may have grown, Sagan was at heart still a kid fantasizing about life on Mars. As the 60s got underway and free love and copious marijuana use blew through university corridors in a cloud of green smoke, Sagan began writing books on the existence of aliens. He got involved with SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Known by another name at that point, it was the pet project of Frank Drake at Cornell University. But there was a story that was much bigger for Sagan's personal life. The breakdown of his marriage. In 1962, Sagan divorced Lynn Alexander and watched as she took the kids away. 4 years later, on April 6, 1986, he married the artist Linda Salzman. That same year, Sagan changed jobs yet again. His fascination with aliens had made the planetary scientist something of an embarrassment to Harvard, so it was with mutual relief that Sagan applied for a job at Cornell, working alongside his new SETI buddy, Frank Drake. At the Laboratory for Planetary Studies, Sagan kept up his work with NASA, becoming part of the briefing team for the Apollo 11 crew. A year later, he finally set out his views on aliens. At a UFO symposium, the scientist argued that intelligent life in our galaxy was a very real possibility, but he also argued against the idea that aliens were visiting the Earth in UFOs and probing farmers' backsides. It was an important distinction, one that distinguished Sagan from the Roswell-obsessed cranks. It also summed up his philosophy neatly. For Sagan, UFOs, they made no sense. They suggested Earth was special, that humans were the center of galactic attention, when rational thought suggested the opposite would in fact be true. Incidentally, it was around this time that Sagan started to get a reputation among his fellow scientists for being an egotist who cared more about publicity stunts than actually crunching data. The next few years, they would do nothing to dispel this belief. By 1971, Sagan was a full professor at Cornell with a nice sideline in briefing reporters on complex scientific topics. His natural charisma and his ability to condense complicated ideas down to an easy-to-understand analogy had made him a darling of the serious press. But if Sagan's fellow scientists were already fed up with his celebrity, they were about to get even fedder-upper. In 1971, NASA was deep in the final preparation stages for the Pioneer 10 and 11 probes. The most ambitious space mission to date, the twin Pioneers were designed to become the first man-made objects to pass through the asteroid belt and investigate the outer planets. But it was another detail about the Pioneers that really captured the public's attention. After they completed their missions, they'd carry on out into interstellar space. If aliens were monitoring our solar system's fringes, Pioneer 10 would be the first man-made object that they ever encountered. Most serious scientists, they paid little attention to this aspect of Pioneer, but the idea it captured Carl Sagan's imagination. If an alien civilization picked up the probe, well, what would they think? Sagan's big breakthrough was realizing that we could tell them what to think. Mere months before the Pioneer's launch, Sagan contacted NASA. He told them that he wanted to affix a plaque to each Pioneer in case aliens found them. To his infinite surprise, NASA basically said, "Sure, why not?" Now, we really should pause here and just take a moment to drink in how kind of insane that is. Launching a probe into the farthest reaches of the solar system is a science so precise that the tiniest change can throw all of your calculations totally out of whack. And now a dude has essentially come along and said that he wants to stick a plaque on the outside of the thing. And yet NASA authorized it. Indeed, they put millions of dollars aside for it. And so it was that in 1971, Sagan, his wife Linda, and Frank Drake sat down to write a message to the universe. Today, the Pioneer plaque is iconic, but even if you've seen it, you might not be aware of quite how detailed it is. The basic idea was to show aliens who we are and where we come from. The first part was easy. The plaque has an engraving of a naked man and a woman who are facing outwards. The second part was much harder. How do you demonstrate ideas of distance to a totally alien intelligence, one which has no conception of feet or meters or anything else like that? Sagan hit upon the idea of using a hydrogen atom. The most common element in the universe, hydrogen atoms can exist in different energy states. When they change states, they release a wave of electromagnetic radiation. Sagan, Drake, and Linda turned this wave into a universal measurement. The length is around 21 centimeters, the length of time that light travels in about 0.7 of a nanosecond. Sagan's team gave this measurement the binary value of 1. They then used it to describe everything from the average height of humans to the distance to the Earth. That image on the plaque's right that looks like a bunch of lines exploding out of the dot, well, that's a map showing the distance from our sun to various neutron stars. If an advanced civilization found it, they could potentially locate our Earth from this map. The plaque is a masterpiece of science and art joined hand in hand, but it's also monumentally useless. Although Pioneer 10 is aiming in the vague direction of another star, Aldebaran, the chances of either probe ever encountering intelligent life is so close to zero, you might as well just say it's zero. People in 1971, they were all too aware of this. There was outrage that Sagan had blown millions of taxpayer dollars on a picture that would never even be seen. Yet Sagan maintains that it was the right thing to do. He wasn't building that plaque for aliens, he was building it for us, here on Earth. He was building it to show the public not just what humanity could do, but how big and wonderful the universe they lived in was. On March 2, 1972, Pioneer launched, followed shortly after Pioneer 11. Today, both probes are still out there, carrying Sagan's plaque towards the very edges of our solar system. Back on Earth, the Pioneer plaque made Sagan an international celebrity, but science's personal publicist wasn't done yet. His greatest achievement, it was just around the corner. But just before we get into that greatest achievement, let me tell you about today's rather appropriate sponsor, Brilliant. And a big thanks to Brilliant for making these longer videos possible. Brilliant are a science learning platform that allow you to learn through something called active learning, which summed up is basically the opposite of reading a super dense textbook, not really understanding everything and reading the same page 6 times over and still not really getting it. Anyone else? Probably not just me. Brilliant use something called active learning, which is where you read a paragraph and then you're asked to apply it to a question, which basically means you have to use that knowledge that you just read, and that is an incredibly effective way to learn. Now, Brilliant cover a whole lot of science. They don't just cover the basics. They go all the way through to things like complex statistics and a whole lot else. Now, if you've been watching Biographics for a while, you've heard me talk about Brilliant before. You might have even signed up to it already, so in that case, sorry for wasting your time with another Brilliant advert. But if you haven't, well, just go and do it. It's a really perfect fit for this channel because, I mean, you're here, you're watching a 20-minute educational video on Carl Sagan. Brilliant is something you will like, I promise you. So just click that link below and go check it out. Now, recently, Brilliant also made an important update to their mobile app so that the courses that were previously only accessible online can now be accessible offline, so you don't have to worry about having a solid internet connection if you want to learn something through their platform. Maybe you want to pick up something on your commute into work, or, well, wherever you are, you can access Brilliant and learn something new. So yeah, if you want to support Biographics, good thing to do, and get unlimited access to all of Brilliant's in-depth math and science courses, or maths as we'd call it in the UK, or you can head over to brilliant.org/biographics and get 20% off their annual premium subscription. Find a link to that below, and let's get back to Sagan and his crowning achievement. The next few years saw Sagan establish himself as the best-known scientist in America. He appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. He became the public face of NASA's Viking project to land a probe on Mars. He also had a not insignificant effect on the future of popular science. In 1975, a 17-year-old Neil deGrasse Tyson nearly had a heart attack when he got a letter from Sagan telling him his Cornell application was inspiring and inviting him to come and visit sometime. But it was in 1977 that Sagan pulled off his greatest publicity stunt of all. At the time, NASA was preparing to launch 2 Voyager probes towards Jupiter and Saturn, and then they would carry on into interstellar space. Buoyed by the PR Pioneers plaque had generated, the agency contacted Sagan with a much bigger proposal. They wanted to send a literal record of humanity into space for aliens to one day find. And NASA? They wanted Sagan to decide what would go on it. Voyager's golden record is today iconic, but in 1977 it was a head-scratching challenge. Pressing a record and encoding it with instructions would be hard enough, but the real challenge would be choosing what to put on it. To represent humanity, Sagan assembled a team consisting of himself, his wife Linda, Frank Drake, and the artist John Lomberg, as well as Timothy Ferris, a contributing editor to Rolling Stone. He also invited on board the writer Anne Drian, and we'll have more on her in a moment. For the next few months, the team worked at a fever pitch, trying to cram as much information onto the record as possible. Famously, this included samples of human heartbeat, greetings read out in 55 different languages, whale songs, and the whole of Chuck Berry's Johnny Be Good. It also included a handful of analog pictures. There were some obvious ones, such as the Taj Mahal and the Golden Gate Bridge, the sort of pictures you'd include if you were sending up a Lonely Planet guide to humanity. But there were more scientific ones too. DNA structures, images explaining human processes of eating and drinking, athletes performing exercises. But the most interesting was a scan of the author Anne Drian's brainwaves. During the recording process, the team reasoned that a super-advanced alien society could probably take those brainwaves and decode them. So Drian was given strict instructions to think about certain common objects, and then had her brain scanned for an hour. It was only much later, after Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 were well on their way out of the solar system, that Drian admitted that she hadn't done as she was told. On June 1, 1977, just before her brainwaves were monitored, she and Sagan had started an affair. Her recording was full of thoughts of the man that she'd just fallen for. That's right, the farthest man-made object in human history is, in part, a secret love letter to the man behind it all. Voyager 2 launched on August 20, 1977. Voyager 1 followed on September 5th. Sagan described them eloquently as a message in a bottle cast into the cosmic sea. 35 years later, in 2012, Voyager 1 became the first man-made object to ever enter interstellar space. Although Voyager 2 has since joined it in November of 2018, it remains the farthest man-made object from Earth. Unless we discover warp drive, it's a record that probably won't be beaten. Not long after the probes went up, Sagan and Drian started looking for a reason to carry on working together. That same year, they hit on the perfect idea. They would write a TV show about science, one that condensed the whole amazing history of human achievement into 13 hour-long, thought-provoking episodes. The name of that show? Cosmos. For millions of people, their defining image of Carl Sagan will forever be the scientist standing on the edges of a low cliff before a pounding sea, describing the impossible extent of our universe. The first episode of Cosmos aired on September 28, 1980, 3 years after Sagan and Drian first sat down to start writing. These had not been easy years. There was Sagan's ongoing, very acrimonious divorce from Linda Salzman, for one thing. For another, there was the way, in 1979, that Sagan's father Samuel came down with cancer. The onset was so swift, so shocking, that Samuel and Rachel were forced to move in with Sagan and Drian. For months, Sagan had watched his father dying, unable to tear himself away from his work on Cosmos and at Cornell long enough to give his old man the goodbye that he deserved. When Samuel finally passed away in October of 1979, Sagan was devastated. Yet, life must go on, and for Carl Sagan, that meant finishing Cosmos for PBS. American public television has simply never created anything as popular since. It's estimated that 500 million people watch Cosmos globally on transmission. What's striking today is how captivating it remains. While the retro 80s graphics are amusing in hindsight, Sagan's earnestness, it still shines through. His feeling of wonder is still enough to make you want to quit the YouTube channel that you work on and dedicate your life to science. Still, not that it's a perfect show, by any stretch. The endless shots of Sagan pulling up dandelions and gasping in awe at some computer graphic are almost enough to make you wet yourself trying not to laugh. There's actually a story that Sagan only intended to use 1 or 2 of these shots, but he managed to annoy one of the producers so much that the guy stuck them into every episode just to try and make Sagan look as silly as possible. Unintentionally hilarious cutaways aside, Cosmos still managed to turn Sagan into a household name. Had he ended his career at this point, in fact, he probably would be remembered warmly by just about everyone. But Sagan, he didn't stop there. Instead, he followed up Cosmos by getting seriously into activism. The turning point came in 1983. 2 years before, Sagan had finished divorcing Linda and married Anne Drian, and now he was settling down to life with the woman of his dreams. But it was a life that was very nearly snatched away from him. That year, Sagan went into hospital for a routine appendectomy and nearly died. He came so close to bleeding out that only a 10-hour emergency surgery saved his life. When Sagan recovered, he seemed changed by the experience. Now he no longer wanted to merely educate people about the world. He rather wanted to shape it for the better. He began while he was still in the ICU, organizing a mass protest against Ronald Reagan's new Star Wars missile defense system, a protest that made him unpopular among Republicans. Not that Sagan cared. Horrified by US nuclear brinkmanship with the Soviet Union, he attempted to win over the public to his cause. In 1983, Sagan co-authored the paper that introduced the concept of a nuclear winter, the idea that even a limited nuclear exchange would cool the climate so drastically that famine would wipe out most of humanity. Around the same time, Sagan began campaigning against global warming, calling it a threat to mankind and demanding an international solution. It was typical Sagan, focusing on the big picture to the detriment of all else. In 1986, he even managed to get himself arrested at an anti-nuclear event in Nevada for trespassing on government property in an attempt to halt underground testing. Still, this was a minor brush with the law at best. And controversial or not, Sagan, he was still beloved by millions. He was only 52. He had decades left to win people over to his side, didn't he? On February 14, 1990, Voyager 1 turned its camera towards Earth for the final time. From unimaginable millions upon millions of miles away, the probe snapped a photo of our planet suspended in a sunbeam. The picture was the work of Carl Sagan, who'd convinced NASA to turn Voyager 1 around for this one moment. When the image finally arrived back on Earth, it changed our conception of our planet. You've almost certainly seen the pale blue dot photo before, almost certainly felt that sense of awe, seeing everything you've ever known reduced to a tiny speck in the infinity of space. But Sagan wasn't content to simply be the driving force behind the image. He wanted the picture to make a statement that mankind could carry through the ages. It's a statement that's worth quoting at length. Look again at that dot. That's there. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you've ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. If there's ever been a more perfect summing up of the vastness of the cosmos or mankind's position within it, well, we've yet to hear it. For the consummate publicist Sagan writing this speech, it was just another act in a career that had already come to define how we think about space. He had no way of knowing that this would be his last great moment. The warning signs, they came subtly. In 1994, Anne noticed a bruise on Sagan's arm that wouldn't fade. After at first dismissing it, Sagan finally went to the hospital for a blood test. A few days later, the doctor called up sounding deeply apologetic. They'd messed up the samples, the doctor said. Sagan would have to come for another test. When Anne asked why, the doctor replied that there was no way that this could be Sagan's blood. Whosever it was, they would be dead within months. But of course, there had been no mistake. Sagan was diagnosed with myelodysplasia, a type of cancer, and he was given 6 months to live. Although his sister managed to buy him some time with an extremely painful bone marrow transplant, it could only delay the inevitable. On December 20th, 1996, after 2 grueling and painful years, Carl Sagan died at the age of 62. The astronomer of the people. He was no more. For a generation, Carl Sagan came to define how they thought about the universe. He handed them the tools to make sense of the vast and empty cosmos around them, and in doing so, he brought a sense of hope and of wonder to us all. Yet his story may not be over. In around 296,000 years, Voyager 2 is expected to pass the great sun of Sirius in the constellation Canis Major. There, it is possible that it could be intercepted by an alien civilization, a civilization that might just have the power to decipher the golden record that it is carrying and to access the data and decode Androian's recorded brainwaves. If they did that, then they'd find the image of the man who'd made that record, the faintest analog memory of the astronomer who, impossibly eons ago, had captured Droyan's heart. The chances of this scenario coming to pass are infinitesimally small, verging on the utterly impossible. But the chance is still there. For Carl Sagan, the boy who once looked at the stars above Brooklyn and dreamed of being abducted by aliens, the thought that his image could live on like that, no matter how improbable, might have been enough. So I really hope you found that video interesting and inspiring. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos just like this several days a week. Also, please do check out Brilliant, our fantastic sponsor. There's a link to them below. And as always, thank you for watching.